cards.
Right.
We're taking adult use cannabis to them and paying the tax and you know and eating the cost of it. It's that medical provision that the city is requiring is not helping on for the seriously ill people.
So I'm going to put 1A, 1B, except because that's the system that we're living in right now. So with the task force recommendation, is there anything else on these? I know there's a lot that we need to address on that. Anything else that I should write down? Come on.
I just want to clarify, 1B, when it says medical only applicants, if those are medical only applicants for the card or to sell?
For the dispensary, I think that is.
So, yeah, a dispensary or a retail.
So if you
Cannabis
just want to do medical.
But
Cannabis-
I thought 1A is that you can't be medical only. Oh, you can be medical only, you
But
just
you
can't be
can't
be
recreational.
Correct.
Yeah, that's the thing. So those are the two different ones on there. So is there anything else I should add here that just we think that this whole topic needs further discussion? But I think for right now, the San Francisco.
I would maybe put that we waive the medical fee, the license fee, that we look at waiving the medical license fee.
Doesn't solve the problem.
So I guess change it to shall create.
But the issue is not, the city doesn't have a license fee yet. So this is the state fee.
Yeah.
So we have to recommend
So
it
I
the
think,
state.
yeah, we have to, the pay, the dual probably covers that the way that we did that.
I would imagine that the city is going to come up with something, but they haven't come up with it.
And then that takes us down into the cost concerns are on here. 2A, compassion programs should be targeted to low-income and indigent populations, veterans and patient populations who can identify and accept on that. Sarah.
Yeah, I like 2A through D. I think they're all good.
Okay. Anybody have any additional comments or recommendations that we should put on the side for that?
Do we want to add HIV? I think it's that's patient HIV population.
Seniors.
I don't know, because it says patient populations who can identify needs. So, in other words, it's means tested, that's what it looks like, right?
So,
Right, this is for medical patients, so it's going to be anyone who qualifies under 215, which is HIV.
so I'm going to put accept on these ones just so we can work on that. And we're still going to take this to the larger group also, so if you have any other comments that pop into your head, feel free to do that. So then we're going to pass, which
Have a city written mandate that the city
my next page.
and that would be before the ordinance that was mentioned.
So, let's see here, so clarity and advocacy for state allowance of compassion programs. The recommendation, the city should advocate to the state to allow counties to maintain compassion programs within the M-type supply chain.
So I mean, we just discussed the problem, you know, which is, you know, M-type licenses, you know, in order to distribute require a patient to have the state card, which is a problem. So, you know, how do we fulfill that, the intent of that recommendation by thinking a little outside the box or broader?
Is this,
I mean, what if we just took out within the M-type supply chain and we just said the city should advocate for the state to allow counties to maintain compassion programs?
Yeah, exactly.
so we would do
So
a
revise.
revise on this one.
And strike within the M-type supply chain.
Provide a method by which patients can research eligibility to retailers or potential nonprofits. This resource should be provided at little to no cost to the patient.
Strike little to, so it'll say private at no cost.
Strike little to.
Okay, I think that would be, that one's pretty good. Preservation of compassionate care model. So if everybody has a chance, board of supervisors,
So 4A,
yeah,
we're
4A.
going to revise that and add the ability for a standalone organization a process to have a compassion program. So that recommendation says create compassion programs or allow for retailers to establish. So I guess it does. The city should create, well, no, it says the city should create a compassion program.
Or allow retailers to establish their own, so that's for existing ones, or the city to establish. 4B though goes into the city should consider.
But we need autonomous ones also.
So
That
4B
recommends-
covers that one.
Can I just do a point of information? There are two baby step amendments that already allowed for the compassion programs to continue for Sheehy, am I not correct?
Yes.
They're
And
in
Mercury,
there,
too.
I think those amendments are in.
Well, they were voted upon. There were two baby step amendments that Access to Love worked on with Sheehy that were voted on, which allow, if you want, so that,
Voluntary.
and it also went into at the manufacturer level was the last one that got pushed through at the very last moment, because if you have it just with retail, that can create some issues.
Okay.
So there's two amendments already in there with Sheehy.
So I think then we can look at this as far as accepting it as written with any notations that we want to add on this. Which we'll implementing a compassion program. So I think we're gonna do 3A, so that's 4A, 4B. There is no 4C. You got me, good. Okay, we'll make it right.
I'd say foresee a revision. As a retailer, I don't like gross taxes or gross receipts taxes, because that's a tax that the consumer doesn't see. Now, I'm less opposed to it in this scenario, but when it goes to the state fund or whatever, I think the consumer should see the taxes. So I prefer to see a sales tax funding compassion programs versus a gross receipts tax, because that says percentage of monthly gross revenue, which translates to gross receipts. That's just my.
So it's the same,
I'm on 4C.
it's the same tax, it's just applied at a different point so that it's visible.
Yes, it's a visible tax, so the consumer understands what they're.
Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
to go back.
So sorry, go ahead.
For 4A, Eric, you were saying addability.
No, 4B covered. 4B was part 3
Yeah.
of 4A.
Yeah, so 4A and 4B, we voted to accept, or we recommended to accept, and then 4C, possible revision. And you just said it really, really good, and it slipped out of my head, that it's a tax that consumes, that is a visible tax.
Yeah, a line item sales tax versus a gross receipts tax.
Okay.
What we have right now, which
Another
is,
tax is
you know,
pretty hard to meet, you're gonna have a grocery receipts tax anyway, here at the city, so like.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can change that. I mean.
Well, you can't change that, what I'm saying is, any sort of additional tax on the retailer seems crazy to me. I mean, you can charge the adult consumer. As you were saying earlier, just collect that one.
Well, yeah, if they're gonna pass a tax, make it a tax, not a gross
You're gonna make
receipts.
the tax.
So we want a line item sales tax that consumers can see. Is that-
Yeah, in contrast to a gross receipts tax, which is invisible to the consumer.
I'm saying.
Well, then just
I'm
to
saying
clarify,
all-
4C is saying either you provide a compassion program or you pay into a fund. Basically, it's not actually creating a new tax, it's saying either you make donations within your own compassion program that you have, or you like pay into the fund, so it's not as much a tax as a, like, help out one way or another.
What is Berkeley, is it Berkeley, is it part of the, like 13 additional percent, isn't that part of that?
Yep.
compassion?
2%.
Well, they just dropped it to 5, because they realized it was too high.
So two compassion, 3 to.
I don't know what the numbers are.
So would this be,
I understand it to be 2.
So why are we accepting any other additional, any tax other than what is going about?
This is not a tax, this is voluntary, right?
This is just voluntary?
So, in lieu of creating an on-site program, retailers could provide a percentage of monthly gross revenue to this fund. So it's more like the equity incubator, where you can either, if you don't qualify as an equity incubator, you can, as an equity program, you can incubate another one. This one, you can provide your own compassion program, or you can pay into this fund to help other programs get a nonprofit license. So It's, I mean, it depends on kind of what enforcement mechanism there is. Is this mandated, in which case it starts to look like a fee or a tax?
Then it's a voter initiative.
So would this be, maybe not have this provision as some clarity in the, how it would be implemented?
There needs to be clarity on the mechanism of this.
So,
Is this something like equity incubator where you're getting some sort of preference or, support in exchange for doing this? Or is this just a mandate, in which case it starts to become a tax?
Well, so, if we're recommending a portion of the sales tax that the city's going to pass on this go to a compassion fund, then is 4C necessary?
Great. I mean, most of 4C is saying the city should allow for some flexibility. That part is good. We just have questions about the mechanism for how this funding happens.
yeah, I think I just put needs to have clarity in the mechanisms of 4C, and if that's enough notation for us.
Was there any recommendation or just asking for clarity?
I think the recommendation would be to have clarity.
Great. Is this being proposed as an actual tax, in which case it needs to be part of the ballot initiative, or is this proposed to be a voluntary thing that retailers choose to participate in?
Yeah, so we're recommending that there be more clarity in 4C.
But you don't have a preference one way or the other?
No, we have to, I believe the task force has to make a recommendation. The Prop 215 was the Compassionate Use Act. I think we'd make a mockery of the task force if we are not recommending that compassion be part of our licensing system.
So
that's just my opinion.
But
We've all got opinions.
Doing that. The question is about this specific mechanism, not the overall program.
Right.
Yes, so our
But
recommendation.
there was, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this? I was asking that we decide.
So which of the two do you feel like is a stronger support for compassion programs?
The simpler administrative support is a line item retail tax.
And you're saying in addition to require compassion programs by dispensaries,
No.
in addition to that?
No,
Okay.
no.
Well, so I think where we get into
Is it
with
choice?
4C is a choice.
Yeah.
And so in 4C, we're saying, well, if you have a compassion program, then maybe you aren't collecting the tax or
But
paying
in
the
lieu of
tax.
that-
But it's a sales tax, so,
But as the law is written, you have to maintain your medical license, which costs you $25,000.
But that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, but no, but it is.
you can have a compassion program without a medical license.
Yep.
You can have compassion program without requiring people to have a state card, which requires a medical license.
Because there's no sale.
No, because there's no, you can give cannabis to someone who doesn't have a recommendation. No, it's because you're accepting the excise tax, which is debatable as to whether it's charged or not on something that's free.
So I think,
So the compassion is completely separate from it.
Yes.
exactly, which is part of.
Okay. Okay.
So, Terrence, in terms
Yeah.
of 4C specifically,
Yeah.
it sounds like you've got strong feelings about this, but I'm trying to understand in which direction you're going.
My strong feelings are that the more complicated the mechanism to comply with the compassion program, the less the city will be able to enforce it. So if you have an either-or situation, that if you allow the dispensary to have a compassion program, how are you going to monitor that that compassion program is of equal value to a mandatory 1% or whatever
Yeah.
sales
So it sounds
tax?
like you're actually opposed to 4C and you would like us to not accept this.
The either or.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
That's my recommendation. And
No, thank you, that was not, I didn't.
I'm sorry,
that wasn't clear.
I wasn't clear. Thank you.
Yeah,
So that's actually a recommendation to omit 4C, to strike 4C
Okay.
coming from
So this
Terrence.
one here,
How do we feel about that?
I think it's fine. I think if a dispensary wants to have a compassion program and they want to have a nonprofit component, they should have every
right to do that.
Well, and the city is collecting sales tax revenue and dispersing it to legitimate compassion programs,
It would
then
go
that
to them.
dispensary could
Yep.
accept those funds in order to.
Exactly. If they qualified,
If
they
they
would accept,
qualify.
they could accept the funds.
All right, so we want to actually omit 4C.
I think okay, so 4C is an omit, and then this is all nothing. That was just our
Yes.
discussion.
Right, we don't need to,
Yeah, I will write,
We're agreeing, just
and I will write.
What's that?
4C.
we're agreeing, just in a different way.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we are.
It's complicated.
We took a circular route, but we got
We
there.
did.
Okay, so now, since we're not here, we may have to scribble there too. So determine eligibility, 5A. This talks about the existing identification card current.
I'm fine with that. I wonder if, I mean, if going through the state card process is cumbersome, I'm not entirely sure that the local process is that much less cumbersome. I mean, it addresses the,
Such as MMIC program,
Yeah.
such as the MMIC
I mean, a
program.
such as is fine. We can leave in a such as. That's not a mandate. That's a example.
Yeah, but.
Takes us off track a
But
little.
it takes us, but we don't like that program. I don't think we want to use that program,
Yeah.
do we?
Because it doesn't determine eligibility. It determines your eligibility for medical, but that's not what we're doing here. We're talking about eligibility for compassion, which has to do with your income. So it has to be, we've got to have a such as, if we're going to put one in there, that is based on income eligibility, not medical eligibility. That's my only point.
Well, that's
It
been
moves in that
my
wrong
hand,
direction.
because the medical thing is confusing, because it's not medical, but based, that's all.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
what are the qualifying conditions, huh? Like
Yeah.
Lyme disease, you
Well,
know?
yeah.
That be such as the medical
Yeah.
marijuana.
Good luck even getting a tree, let alone get a
So
diagnosis.
should lever existing provisions as a pathway to determine eligibility and provide a method.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Is that,
Yeah, we're good.
Yep.
okay. So let's get on to 6.
And so now we have 5 minutes left for this conversation today.
Oh my God.
At the next.
6A is just a yes, right?
City should encourage retention of existing.
6B is a yes?
6A, 6B, yes, anybody else?
No, hold on, wait,
Oh.
so should I disallow?
Yeah.
So you don't have to,
It's a double negative, so it's
you
not
don't have
hard
to,
You don't have to buy something to
purchase.
use the space.
Well, I mean, that doesn't make sense unless you're a compassionate user, right? Because if you're just letting people like buy it on the black market and come in and smoke in your space, technically, you know what I mean?
Well, that's a good point. But basically, the recommendation is requiring people who have vapor lounges to allow people to bring their own cannabis in and use the space.
So what if I,
That seems crazy.
Okay, well,
But if
yeah.
you're a compassion user with your card, come on in and social.
So we allow that, but we also have, you know, some rules where we monitor, you know, to what extent, you know, that happens. So maybe a recommendation while allowing the retailers some proper
Right, guidance.
guidance, you know, or leeway.
Yeah.
It seems bad. It's like walking into a bar with somebody else. You can't even come with a coffee to a coffee shop.
Well, I hear it.
Maybe this speaks to the difference between the nonprofit compassion spaces and for-profit retail space. Because you're right, you can't walk into a coffee shop with your own thermos of coffee, but you can walk into, you know, some sort of social club or meeting with your own cup of coffee, right? So making that distinction.
That's
I
very
think if
good.
you're the bars man, we,
You can bring you come to the bar for your weed, it gets you out of control.
Exactly, yeah.
okay,
Because you
so
can't buy it at the bar. Yet.
so we could amend that to while allowing some sort of leeway for abuse or something. I don't know what the word is.
It's really awkward. So what I'm saying is like there might be a word
Well, we've got about 30 seconds to word it. I'm sorry to do that to us.
Do you want to say just that the city should allow compassionate
Consumption in all.
Without purchase.
Without purchase, yeah.
Say that or socializing. That's what we're really next week.
City should allow compassionate consumption without purchase.
We have other ones up.
Okay. So thank you, everybody. This is not easy. We didn't quite
We
get
didn't
done.
quite get through
But
9.
we got pretty good. Yep.
But they're all, I think, yeah.
I've been involved in a compassion program that was shared with me, and as a result, I'm now from under my disabilities to be able to contribute to the community as a compassion baker. But since January, I've had to back off. And even though I own one of Brownie Mary's mixing bowls, I don't want to go to jail for doing the same thing. I've made over 40,000 brownies in the last 15 years and given them away. And now I have to stop until stuff gets fixed. You know, I mean, and this is just a shame. And then the other thing is too, when they were competing, MCLR 64 and the different things competing to get voted on, money just pushed the right one out of the way. And again, money is the issue, is that there's so much money to be made from adult use taxes that there should be a portion set aside of that, which would be a drop in the bucket of that, just for compassionate use. And again, we should not have to pay for medicine if adults use is paying all those taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members that, please, yeah? Sorry.
So I'm Shauna Gutner, I'm the
Oh, I know
executive.
your name, Shauna. I'm sorry, I can't see you.
It's all right. I'm Shauna. I've worked on compassion policy for the last 17 years straight explicitly. There's a few things that weren't brought up that we can use in the immediacy. And one is the Business and Professional Code in Prop 64. They inserted this thing to kind of try to woo a few of the compassion coordinators into supporting a really flawed law as we're dealing with the repercussions of it. And so there's some things in it that would need to be tweaked. But what it allows for is for local governments to immediately, so this can end immediately, issue temporary permits to groups primarily serving low-income patients. And this business code was voted in by the state voters, so we need to take that and run with it. And one of the small problems with it is that it says nonprofit, and I want everybody to understand how hard it is for any of these groups to get a nonprofit status. We need to start saying not for profit, because in the current political atmosphere, for us to get a federal nonprofit is going to be right problematic. So there's some things in the Business and Professional Code section of Prop 64 that could work potentially, because it does tip the hat to local groups to immediately bring these about. We worked with Supervisor Sheehy throughout the process through our last regulations to get 2 baby step amends. The first one was that retailers can, if they so choose, continue their compassion programs. A lot are choosing not to because of the tax barrier. This is what I hear constantly. And it also included in the very last moments of the regulations, he included that manufacturers could also do their compassion programs. And of course, the big question is always the taxes. We also passed a law, a non-binding resolution in 2007 that my organization wrote and Mercurini sponsored, and there's a couple components to it that I think are really important to everybody, if you'll just indulge me for a moment. One is that the quality of the medicine. So what we defined compassion as was a high grade. Something, if you wouldn't personally give it to your grandmother, don't give it to a poor person, right? So that is one of them. The other component that's really important of that is being able to keep receipts, because there are cases where you can get a Medi-Cal discount. There was one woman who got a case through, and then, so we have some stuff in place already. And we also have the former recommendations from the former task force that we can also plug into, which what Eric was also bringing up some of that with the collective garden process. We had a low-income cultivation seat that went through a really nice process of bringing up how we could do, you know, sort of communal gardens and support that. So there's a variety of things that we can support and already use to do that. I'm a little bit saddened that Access of Love was not invited to speak, because we brought the patients up for about 17 years to talk to the legislators. And one of the things that the disability movement often says is nothing about us without us. And I'll end on that.
Sir.
It's actually ma'am. Hi, my name is Kendra Sager. On January 9th, I had a major heart attack and died. They brought me back to Suckerman's Hospital. Beautiful hospital. This lady stood beside me the whole time with medical marijuana helping me. I'm a mental patient. I am on disability. We get $983 max. $500 of that pays my rent. I pay $300 to marijuana so I can have a little bit of my own. That leaves me $200 to live on for a month. You know how much $1,000 is? People who make minimum wage make $1,000 a week. You know? March 4th, I had 6 more major heart attacks and died 6 more times. They want me to take Risperdal. You know what Risperdal does to me? Gives me high blood pressure and drives my weight straight to the ceiling. Can you imagine that with a heart patient? I take medical marijuana to help my heart and to live. And I can't afford it. I can't afford $20 a gram. And then tax. The government's already paying me to live. Why am I paying tax?
Thank you, Kendra. Thank you. Cannabis is regulated more than guns. You know, far more than guns. Way more. And the laws are predatory. It's to justify the predatory behavior of the oligarchs. Let's put this in perspective. I can grow cannabis a pound for $10. I don't use fertilizer. I use cat poop and eggshells and things like, you know, natural things. I don't need fertilizer. You know, cannabis survived a lot of years without any fertilizer at all. It doesn't wreck the environment if you don't wreck the environment. I mean, there's a lot of regulations around that too. But I'm saying that I agree with everything she said. I was there for a lot of those, you know, meetings. we're all familiar faces. And even calling it recreational is a joke.